Ladies and gentlemen, we've got another situation of a potential border change regarding states because conservatives in rural counties are not happy with the liberalism that's happening in their overall state government. And so now we've got a situation in Illinois. I talked about the more famous thing with the Greater Idaho movement, where around 13 total counties in Oregon, Eastern Oregon, are very angry and have voted to join Idaho. The big hang up is the fact that both state legislators have to agree on it, and you'd think the Oregon state government would not be too happy with giving up land and population. It's a similar thing with this in terms of Indiana possibly annexing several counties in Illinois because the people of Illinois, obviously in these counties, it's very conservative. Just to add context to this, you can see the photo of what it would look like. This is a little bit more ridiculous in terms of it being scattered. You can see all the different counties that are dissatisfied with the current government there in Illinois. They're all, again, pretty conservative. This seems, this would be like gerrymandering, basically, just the way it looks. If this happened, you'd really want all the counties together, kind of like the Greater Idaho. But if this did happen, you'd say, well, maybe Indiana would gain several electoral votes because they're all rural counties. All the population is in Chicago. It would only be about one electoral vote going from Illinois to Indiana. Although, to be fair, Illinois is probably going to lose around 2 or 3 electoral votes when the census updates in 2030 as well. So if this happened, even though this one's unlikely to happen, but you're seeing this more and more. We've also got the situation in southern Minnesota where you've got like 8 counties on the border with Iowa, and you've got people in Iowa proposing that they buy those counties. So this is kind of an interesting thing happening in many different states, and it's mainly in regards to the exact same idea of big liberal government not really looking out for the conservative people in rural areas. So we're going to read what this is. The Indiana House has passed 2 bills in recent weeks, one targeting downstate counties and another targeting Chicago sports teams. The big picture, the majority Republican state seems to be emboldened, aiming for J.B. Pritzker and the majority Democratic state of Illinois. In Illinois, Democrats hold all statewide elected offices and a supermajority in the House and the Senate. In Indiana, the GOP holds all the statewide elected offices and supermajorities in both of its chambers. So this is a typical Democrat versus Republican in terms of Illinois versus Indiana. And there are a lot of rural people in Illinois that are conservative that would fit the values of Indiana and their state government more so than Illinois. But because of the amount of people within the city of Illinois, it's an extremely liberal state. So you get these kind of weird things to where a lot of the land is conservative, but because it's rural area, there's not a lot of people there. They don't have influence in terms of the government at all. And that's kind of where these things come into play. And especially if you've got a conservative state in both chambers right next to you, you could be looking at a potential annexation into that state. One bill would aim to annex several downstate Illinois counties that approved ballot measures to separate from the state. So there have been counties within Illinois that have voted on, or I guess approved, to separate from the state of Illinois and possibly join Indiana. At least what we would presume is they would separate and then join. Indiana can't just grab the counties, especially since most of the ballot measures weren't about leaving Illinois, but splitting with Cook County. And this is the big problem. Illinois would need to play along and okay the deal, which in 2025 under Democratic control is not happening. And so what I think with a lot of these situations is it's more of a negotiating tactic to where you've got all these conservative people who obviously are not going to be able to influence the government. There's not enough of them, even though they do control a large portion of the land in a lot of the rural areas. They're not going to be able to influence anything because of the amount of liberals in the state. So what they're saying is, well, we can try and join another state that would take us, which would be an Indiana, which would be an Idaho if you're talking about Oregon, which would be a Iowa if you're talking about Minnesota. And you're not going to get that because the Democrats would never allow it to happen because they have to okay it unless there's some type of maybe federal involvement to where they force it to happen, which doesn't seem likely because it is a state-to-state issue. But what you're hoping is maybe they'll start actually hearing out the rural areas and give them something that they would want, as opposed to what's happening right now, to where if you try and, I mean, these are conservative people, you're not going to get very many conservative leaders in Illinois, especially at the state level. Maybe at the local township level, you will, but at the state level, it's just not going to happen. So if they want things allocated for them, or things voted for farmers or for people in rural areas, it's going to be very, very hard to do, considering there's just not many of them. And you see a state right next to you that has a lot more of your shared values within the state government. You could understand these people being angry and possibly trying to break off, although this is very, very unlikely. Again, it's probably more so negotiation. It would be around, with these counties that they're talking about, around 500K total people, which I do think would be around one electoral vote going to Indiana and going away from Illinois. But again, when you look at the map, it really looks completely unrealistic. You look at some of these counties that would want to leave. You can see this map talking about, well, of course, Reddit, they want to take some of the bigger cities in Indiana. But that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about Indiana staying the same size and potentially getting bigger. That's the point. Even though it is very unlikely to actually happen because of this, the fact that, I mean, with it being under Democratic control, that's the reason they want to leave, is because it's under Democratic control. But that's also the reason why the Democrats would not agree to it. But I mean, if Republicans were in control in Illinois, this would not be happening, at least for the people in the rural areas. It's just this phenomenon of the Democrats owning the major cities and the Republicans all over in the rural areas, and it's like a different way of life. So even though you have a state that's pretty liberal, like in Illinois, which votes for Democrats, I mean, in terms of elections, you're talking about 10, 15 points. This recent one was a little bit closer, like around 11 points, but it's only like 15, 20 points. But you still have the extreme to where all the rural areas are very conservative, and it's a different way of life. Yes, you're in the same state as people that live in inner city Chicago and live in apartments and the suburbs surrounding it, but it is a different way of life. But there's no way you're ever going to be able to get anything passed or won at the state level, because of how many liberals that do live in the big cities they're living a different way of life. So the point is that, well, maybe they won't be able to be annexed, the counties won't be able to be annexed because the Democrats in Illinois will never agree with it, but you might be able to get something for it if you show how dissatisfied you are with the government in terms of maybe more funding, or I'm not sure what they're looking at. You can see the frustration from rural Illinois is real, and it's growing by the day. And so it is good to see Indiana continuing its effort to support the liberation of Illinois counties. And then they talk about this bill, which would require the governor of Illinois, Pritzker, to appoint a commission to study adjusting the state borders if Illinois passes its bill. If Illinois did annex the 33 conservative leading downstate counties, Illinois Republicans would lose those votes. But does that really matter? I don't think it really matters if Illinois Republicans lose the votes from those people. The state's already very liberal as it is. You're giving up nothing. They're not going to get anything passed at the state level because of how liberal the state is in Illinois. So, I mean, listen, we'll see. I mean, 33 counties, that does seem like quite a lot, but a lot of them are very sparsely populated. It's important to understand that. So this is just another thing that's happening. We know there's other scenarios. Greater Idaho seems to be the one that has the most potential staying power. Just in terms of the border changes, it looks a lot better, and the counties have already voted on it. That one, though, it wouldn't be an annexation. It would be them joining. I mean, I guess you could maybe call it an annexation. Like in Indiana, Idaho is annexing the counties in eastern Oregon, but that was not the term I heard used in this one. They want to annex those counties. Indiana would. And so it's a situation to where I think it's very unlikely to happen. But when you're talking about border adjustments and things like this, I wonder if any of these actually will catch enough attention. The big hang up here would not be Indiana. It would not be the conservatives in Illinois. It would be the Democrat government or the Democrat leadership in both. It would be Oregon, because the counties in Oregon are trying to leave. And then it would be the Democratic leadership in Illinois. They don't want to lose the population. They don't want to lose the land of the state. And so that's where you start talking about, maybe because they're angry and the people want to leave you start doing a negotiation with them and say, all right, well, we'll give you this amount of federal funding or we'll do this for you. And so they become less, or at least they feel less disenfranchised in terms of participation in state government because of how many liberals live in the major cities. Because you're talking about a state like Illinois, there's very conservative areas. There's very conservative areas of New York State. This happens a lot to where, I mean, there's extremely conservative areas of California. That's why they're talking about maybe splitting California up into 2 different states. I'm not saying any of this is going to happen. I'm just saying this is a growing trend where there's conservatives that own a bunch of the land, but they have basically no say in the state government because of the major cities and the population density of them. So we'll have to see what ends up happening here. You can see, zoom out, the Bears are pushing for the state of Illinois to invest billions for a new stadium. Yeah, that's the Bears' new NFL stadium that they want. I'm not sure how much it would cost the taxpayers, but I know the cost of the total stadium would be, isn't it like $3.4 billion or something like that? So they're talking about that. Indiana has made it clear that any new sports franchise looking for a new stadium would be welcome, which could include other franchises in need of a home. Wow, so Indiana is trying to get an MLB team? They're trying to get the White Sox? Oh, this is kind of a different video, but yeah, so listen, when it comes to this, look, it's unlikely to happen, but I do like covering this stuff. This is good stuff to cover. So, I mean, this is some Reddit fan fiction here, because they want more electoral votes. They want the major cities in Indiana. It's not going to happen. This is more realistic. Indiana stays the same size, but like, what are we doing with all these counties, like this gerrymandering thing? It all has to be connected. Otherwise, it's gonna, it's just going to look weird. You can do a nice connection, but unfortunately, there might be some of these counties that are more Democratic. So it's like, would they want to join? It's very unlikely to happen. Greater Idaho is more combined and unified in terms of like central and eastern Oregon looking to join Idaho, as opposed to this greater Indiana, or whatever you want to call it, Indiana annexing counties in Illinois, which conservatives within Indiana, seems like some of their representatives within their government want to do it. And the conservatives in Illinois want to do it, but it's also has to be agreed upon, unless there's going to be some type of pressure that's applied to Illinois state government. There's no reason for them to agree to do this. But you can understand if Republicans don't feel like their voices are being heard. I mean, if you want to compare it to maybe Democrats in certain cities like Austin, Texas, but those people all moved from California anyways. I mean, it's like, but I mean, there are conservative states that have very liberal cities, and but even that, it's like, I think it's a little bit different than Republicans controlling all of this land but having no say in the state government because of the mass city centers that are just very liberal, that just overwhelm the smaller rural populations. And so the way of life is way more similar to the governance in Indiana than Illinois. So you can understand the idea of it. I do think it's unlikely, but we'll have to see where this ends up going. Either way, guys, that's going to do it for this video. Make sure you follow me on X. Link to that's always in the description.